Thank you for joining us. Today's webinar is Driving Value Through ESG in Action with Sean O'Byrne and Niels Vestergaard. We're delighted to have you all, as usual, and please let us know in the chat where you're joining us from. We love to see where you're joining us from, right? To explore, how the environment, social, and governance principles are being translated into meaningful action across our business. Today's session will feature insights from two distinguished speakers. Sean O'Byrne is an environmental consultant with some 35 years experience. He has traveled to 58 different countries in Africa, the Middle East, Eastern Europe, Central Asia, and most recently, the Caribbean. Sean has conducted environmental and social impact and due diligence assessments, developed and implemented E&S management systems and programs for a wide range of industries in non-ferrous metals, chemicals and petrochemicals, mining, transport, power generation. Sean works with international funders such as the World Bank, International Finance Corporation, Inter-America's Development Bank, and others to ensure that the environmental and social performance standards are implemented effectively on projects supported by such agencies. He's married to Di and has two sons, Grant and Dave, and loves to tell us that he is manically afraid of spiders. Fun facts. And then we have Niels Vestergaard, is a world-class industrial engineering and E&S ESG risk expert in heavy industries and agribusiness. Currently chief advisor on environmental and social risks at Denmark's International Finance Corporation, helping build E&S competencies and co-authoring key IFC and World Bank Group EH&S guidelines that underpin the Equator Principles. His work spans complex projects in fragile and conflict-affected regions and large-scale industrial sectors, including steel, aluminum, cement, coal mining, and power. We're so pleased also to introduce our Massy team working on the ESG strategies. Adele Rose, ESG Strategy Manager, who is responsible for the development of the group's ESG strategy and ensuring its integration into strategic planning, investments, and operations across the group. And Brent Anthony, Environmental and Social Manager, who leads the development, implementation, and monitoring of the group's environmental and social sustainability strategy across our portfolios, beginning with the IRP. So welcome, everyone. And I'm going to hand over to Adele. And everyone, just for some housekeeping rules, please keep your mics muted if possible. Let's use the chat. We're going to make this really engaging, so you can all, so you all can all place your questions in the chat, and we will respond at the end. So thank you, Adele.
Great. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this session. The reason it's so important for us to introduce you all to ESG is because it is absolutely essential that we have each one of you involved in the process, because we can come up with the policy, we could make all the recommendations, but in order to actually see it implemented across the group, we need first and foremost the input from you all, the feedback from you all, because we do consider you all experts in each and every one of your fields. You are the ones who will be implementing the work, ensuring that it gets done. So thank you all for showing up. And this is a journey that we're on. The expectation is not that, we create a strategy or we create an action plan or management system and it ends there. This is just the beginning of the journey that we look forward to going on with each of you. All right, so now I will hand it over to Sean and Niels.
And Brady. Oh, hi everyone. Brent Anthony here. We are really excited to get this thing up and running and to be part of this exciting new venture for the Massy Group. We are all working with this together. It's not just going to be me doing this or one or two people, but it's for all of us to ensure the future and sustainability of the Massy Group. So thank you, Adele. Thanks for everyone for joining. And please, Niels, Sean, take it away.
Right. Well, good morning, everyone. And Niels, wherever you are, do you want to say good morning as well from?
Good morning as well from Spain. So on a slightly different time zone.
Yes, and from Spain with a Danish accent. So anyway, there you go. So I'm also very fired up to be presenting to you this morning, and I'd also like to thank you for your interest and participating. The presentation is entitled Sustainability and Massy, and I will be talking a little later about do we talk about ESG, do we talk about sustainability, what do we mean? And perhaps at the outset, I can tell you that the concept of sustainability is an interesting one and very widely debated. And I was in a conference a number of years ago where someone said, you know, sustainability is like the Loch Ness monster. Everyone is talking about it, but no one's actually seen it. And this is the challenge that we have, is making it real and making it real for Massy. So I think that's what I'm after. Let me start with this image of this absolutely remarkable planet that we inhabit. And I often feel when you look at an image like this, when you look at our planet during the day, I look at it and I think, is it really possible? Do we as humanity really have the ability to have a material negative impact on this wondrous planet of ours? And when you look at it during the day, you might be tempted to say, no, the scale of the planet is too big. So what you need to do is you need to look at it at night. And this is where you really see the extent of just how humanity really impacts on the planet at a global scale, at planetary scale. And there are a lot of different things that I would like to draw to your attention on this map. But all that I would like to do for today's presentation is to say, look at the energy use. Look at the, see if I can do it like that. Look at the energy use in the Northern Hemisphere to light up cities across that Northern Hemisphere, from the east coast of the United States through Europe. Look at the boot of Italy, on the eastern side of the Mediterranean Sea, extending down into Africa. That is fattening that follows the Nile River. And then if you look at the islands of Japan on the right-hand side of the picture, you can see that the entire islands of Japan are illuminated. And imagine the resources that are needed to provide that energy. And that is just providing light. It's just light. So let's have a look then in the region in which Massy operates. This is a bit of a close-up, also an image taken at night. And you can see again throughout the Caribbean, a lot of energy being used, and that energy is just being used to light up the environment that we inhabit as humans, and the extent to which that actually happens. Waste is an enormously important issue, and I'm sure that if you're on social media, and I know that many of you are not on social media, but you have friends who are on social media, you will see lots of videos and reels and TikToks on pollution that we see in the oceans, plastic pollution in particular. So Let me give you a few statistics on waste, again at a global level. And the first of these is that we have about 9 trillion microplastic fibers shed from synthetic clothing being discharged from washing machines every single week in the United Kingdom alone. 9 trillion microplastic fibers. People consume and inhale between 74,000 and 121,000 pieces of microplastics per year. Not altogether sure how that got counted, but please just accept it as fact. We, as humanity, are producing more than 380 million tons of plastic every year, with about half of that being single-use plastic. So plastic that is not recycled, it's used once and once only, and then it ends up being a waste. And approximately 36% of all plastics produced are used in packaging, including single-use plastic food and beverage containers, 85% of which end up in landfills or as mismanaged waste, as the photograph that you see in the background actually shows you here. There is an organization, an international organization. They call themselves the Alliance for Zero Extinction, and they have garnered information right around the world on critically endangered species, and they have designated the so-called AZE sites, Alliance for Zero Extinction sites, and those sites are where the last remaining populations exist of critically endangered species. If they are lost in those areas, they are lost from the globe and they are lost forever. And look at this here in Trinidad, we have an AZE site up in the northern part of the country. If you've been to Asserite or to Mount Plaisir, those are the areas that are in this AZE site. And what are the species that we're looking at? The first of those is the Paui, the piping guan. Estimated that there are no more than 1,000 of these left in the wild. I am really thrilled to be able to say that I took this photograph. It was a truly wondrous moment for me. This was last Sunday up in the northern part of Trinidad. And let me just, if you'll grant me the indulgence, just to say that the experience that I had at Asserite and Mount Plaisir was honestly fabulous. I'm still overwhelmed by the experience that I had. So that's the first of the 3 species. This is the second of the 3 species, and again, I'm delighted to say that this is a photograph that I took. This is the copper-rumped hummingbird. I understand there are about 38 species of hummingbird in this area, and the final species is the golden tree frog. And again, the message is clear that if these species are lost in this part of the world, then they are lost to the world and they are lost forever. So what does this mean then for Massy? And I'm going to present it to you in a highly simplified manner. There will be follow-up presentations. There will be follow-up discussions where there will be opportunity to get into a much higher level of detail. But the way I'd like you to think about this is to look at Massy as an organization, and Massy produces products that go into the market across the Caribbean and obviously in the US and also in parts of South America. But in order to provide those products, Massy requires resources. So they use resources on an ongoing basis. and they also produce pollution and waste. Massy creates jobs, and Massy spends money in those areas. And those are also two powerful forces that are very important to the state of society in those areas. But at the very highest level, this is what we are looking at when we start to engage with the questions around sustainability. What are the resources used? What's the pollution and waste that is generated? How many jobs are created? How much spending happens? And where does that spending go in order for Massy to continue into the future as a viable and prosperous business? So let's deal with some important concepts. And the first of those is this term ESG. And it stands for environmental, social, and governance. And basically, it reflects on the fact that all organizations or businesses carry varying degrees of environmental and social risk. And the role of governance in all of that is firstly to ensure that there is ethical behavior on the part of the organization in question, that there are processes in place to identify and stop bribery and corruption, but also that there are mechanisms in place within the organization to drive the management of those environmental and social risks. Now, for me, ESG is becoming a little bit of a jaded term. It's been around for maybe 15 or 20 years now. It's used a little too loosely, a little too colloquially, as far as I'm concerned, but it does create this identity. It does directly and explicitly refer to environmental and social risks. So we're not going to write it off just yet, but I'll tell you what we're going to do shortly. And then, and many of you will be familiar with this, distinguishing between renewable and non-renewable. And the best example of non-renewable resources are fossil fuels such as crude oil, natural gas, coal, and others, where once they are used, they are used. We don't have the luxury of allowing the Earth another 4 or 5 million years to produce some more fossil fuels for us. So whatever we use now is not going to be replaced. And so the big challenge within this ESG domain is really looking for opportunities to use renewable resources rather than non-renewable resources.
Ollie
And then
Ollie and Kingston.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Just someone had their mic unmuted. I muted it. That's fine.
Okay, thank you. All right, and then this is the golden term, and the term is sustainability. And the way we define that is maintaining, supporting, or enduring processes over the long term. And that is so important because that is what sustainability really means to an organization like Massy, that you are around for the long term, that you adapt to changing circumstances and you respond to those changes and you ensure that you endure into the long term. And we can define sustainability in terms of business sustainability. In other words, the business continues to operate profitably and on that basis continues into the future. But we can also define sustainability in terms of environmental sustainability, that we use the resources that the earth has to offer. We use them carefully, we use them judiciously to ensure that we do not exhaust those resources. And I hope it'll be self-evident that you cannot have business sustainability without environmental sustainability. So that environmental sustainability, you can look at it as something that is just the right thing to do, or you can look at it from the point of view of if the business wants to be around in 10 or 15 years, and I'm pretty sure that it does, then it needs to get serious about environmental sustainability. So how does that then get applied, at least in principle, within the organization? So we return to the schematic that I showed you earlier. And on the resources side, really what we're talking about is replacing, wherever possible, resources with renewable resources. And there are lots of opportunities to do that. The one, I guess, that will be more obvious to you is energy, where you may move from using a fossil fuel such as natural gas or oil as an energy source and move to renewable energy sources such as wind or solar or concentrated solar thermal or others where the energy is renewed on a daily basis. On the pollution and waste side, what needs to happen is that pollution and waste needs to be prevented ultimately, but at least reduced as far as possible in the short term. And then what we do on the benefit side is we look at how do we maximize the benefits? How do we ensure that the benefits that are created as a result of the Massy operation extend as far as they possibly can and have the biggest impact possible? And that is not a philanthropic thing. It is running the business in such a way that the benefits really accrue locally as far as possible, and then to as many people as possible, but very much a part of the business, integrated with the business and part of the value proposition. So we're not talking about social investment or any of those kinds of things, although they are important. We're talking about using the business to create those benefits in the day-to-day running of the business. So how are we going to make it happen within Massy? And again, keeping this at a fairly schematic, fairly simplified level, the first thing we do is we identify the facilities, all the physical infrastructure that belongs to Massy across the entire region. And for example, we have the distribution centers, we have the retail stores and others. And then what we define are all of the activities, for example, freighting of merchandise, transport, storage, LPG provision, manufacturing, vehicle sales. And again, this is not a comprehensive list, it's just to give an example of what we mean by those activities. And we then look at the resources that are needed for each of those facilities, for each of those activities. And we look at the waste and pollution that is generated for each of those facilities and each of those activities. And then we look at the incidents that may occur. And these incidents are possible environmental incidents, such as spills of hazardous material, but they could also be occupational health and safety incidents, accidents. They could also be third-party related incidents, such as vehicle accidents, all of which need to be understood and managed in terms of the risk that they pose to the business. Then what we do is for all of those risks, we say, what can we do now to start the journey of addressing those risks? And we do it for both the short term and the long term. And for resources, what we want to do in the short term is we want to maximize the efficiency of the resources that we use. So we find ways of ensuring that when we use a resource, we get the maximum possible return on it. And ultimately, where we are headed in the long term is to substitute the non-renewable resources for renewable resources, because that is the only way ultimately that you can establish true sustainability. On the waste and pollution side, right now in the short term, we want to make sure that we are reusing and recycling as far as we possibly can. Within IRP, for example, there is a lot of packaging material. What gets done to ensure that that is recycled or reused to the maximum extent possible, and over the long term, driving a process of eliminating waste and pollution. And it's also important to recognize that waste and pollution for an organization like Massy, it's actually a financial cost. It may not seem like it, but it is a financial cost. Resource use is a financial cost. So not only is there a sustainability benefit to the organization, but there is a financial benefit too, because you are reducing costs when you reduce resource use and when you reduce waste and pollution. And then when it comes to incidents, what we do in the short term is we do risk identification, we do risk reduction, and again, ultimately we are headed to long term of risk prevention. And this, at a very high level and in very broad terms, is the approach that is being adopted in Massy currently in order to get the Massy ship pointed in the direction of sustainability and to embark on that journey. Katrina, I assume you will alert me if there's a question.
Yes, for sure.
Okay.
For sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Mhm.
All right. I have to fess up to the fact that I struggle a bit with the Caribbean accent. And if I'm looking at someone while they're speaking, then I can hear what they say without too much difficulty. But sometimes when people go full Caribbean, I do struggle a little bit. So and Brent says he will act as my translator if that's required. Now, once we've gone through the exercise of understanding where the risks lie, where the sources of risks that fly in the face of sustainability, once we understand those, we start to implement across the organization. Firstly, for the facilities, we implement E&S standards that pertain to what those facilities need to be equipped with. And those E&S standards will reflect on some of the stuff that you do already anyway, such as fire protection and fire prevention, but then will also extend into other requirements as they become relevant. And every facility will be equipped with those requirements, that infrastructure, as the minimum Massy standard. And that will obviously happen over time. And then what we do with the activities is we define environmental and social procedures for those activities to reduce resources and to reduce the waste and pollution and to maximize the opportunity for benefit that come out of those. And again, we start where we are right now, focusing on those short-term interventions that I described earlier, and ultimately moving over time towards the longer-term imperatives that we've described. And then what we do is we conduct inspections and we monitor and we track incidents and activities so that we can assess on an ongoing basis. Are we implementing the standards? Are we implementing them consistently, comprehensively? When we conduct activities as Massy, are we following those procedures? And those are critical checks and balances that need to be in place, because one of the great things about sustainability, and one of the great challenges with sustainability, is external reporting on your performance. And we've had a wonderful exercise over the last couple of days where what's been highlighted to us is actually a treasure trove of information that is actually at our fingertips, but with some tweaks, some refinements, some small interventions, that information is going to become available to us for use in reporting processes. And the way we draw this all together is in the form of an environmental and social management system. And the primary objective of this environmental and social management system is to drive the organization towards sustainability. It is to map out the journey. It is to define the roles. It is to define the procedures. It is to define the infrastructure. And it is to define the information that we need for that system and where we source it from and how it's made available on a regular basis for management review. And where we start with that is with IRP. We're in the process of formalizing an environmental and social management system for IRP at the moment. The documentation, the manual, the recipe, if you like, has been put together. And we spent the last several days working on an implementation plan where we've translated those requirements into specific requirements within IRP for people on the front line. And we will run the implementation program. We will kick it off from the end of February for implementation within IRP. And then thereafter, the environmental and social management system will be rolled out progressively to the rest of Massy so that at some defined point, the entire organization will be within the environmental and social management system so that the entire organization is drawn into that sustainability journey and taken forward on that basis. So what is your role? What is expected of you? And one of the things that's been repeated a number of times is that when you have something like this put on the table, typically your intuitive response is going to be, oh my word, this is going to be a huge amount of additional work for me. And at the outset, we are working really, really hard to simply extend what you do currently rather than wholesale changes within the organization. We want to capitalize on what you do currently. We don't want to walk in and say, oh, is that how you've been doing it? Well, from tomorrow it changes. It's nothing like that. And what we want of you, please, is to engage with us in that process, raise comments, concerns, and questions so that we can provide responses. If you're sitting there and you're concerned about what's happening, you're apprehensive about it, you're anxious about it, share that with us, because that will help us to provide you with the answers that you need. Don't disengage, and don't be scared of asking difficult questions. Don't be scared of asking stupid questions, because what we need for engagement is we need your understanding so that you can decide how best you participate in this process. The second thing is the implementation of the requirements. And we are going to be stipulating various requirements in terms of both facility standards, but also in terms of activities. And what we're going to ask of you is that if you have a task that is sent your way, that task be implemented regularly and comprehensively. Then we want you to contribute to a sustainability culture. And the way in which you do that is that if you're chatting at the water cooler and someone conveys something negative about this sustainability principle, not asking you to ridicule those views, but we are asking you to try and encourage a positive approach to sustainability. And I think that a very nice way of thinking about this is, I was told once by a former boss, he said to me, Sean, you must learn to differentiate between being cynical and being skeptical. And skepticism is always welcomed, because skepticism allows us to answer the questions. Cynicism is more of a negative, because cynicism implies that you've written it off before you fully understand it. So bring your skepticism. We will use it to engage, and we will use it to ensure that we are sharing the right information with you. And where there is cynicism, please assist us in trying to eradicate that cynicism and move it more towards skepticism. And then finally, accountability and reporting. And this is around providing information and also reporting on incidents. And the key maxim for the management system is moving what we require to the front line. So where people are involved in activities, that's where we need the procedures to be implemented. And that is also the source of the information that we seek to be able to check on an ongoing basis how we're doing relative to the objectives we set and where we need to implement corrective action. So thank you very much for your time. I'm excited about this journey, and I hope you are too. And even if you're not excited about it, please do us the favor of sharing the reasons why you're not excited, so that we can look at ways of getting you revved up, of getting you to see how important this is for Massy's future, and also to growing understanding and knowledge about this issue into the future. Thank you, Katrina.
Thank you so much. That was really informative. Thank you so much. If anyone has any questions, please post them. I have a couple of questions that have come in, so I will put them forth. But if you have any questions, post them in the chat, and Adele and I will do a good job of managing the chat. So the first one, from your global experience, I don't know, Sean or Niels is there as well, whoever would like to respond. What are the biggest practical challenges companies face moving from ESG policy to action on the ground?
Great question, and a very, very simple answer. Implementation. I worked for a very large organization, and we had this very cynical view that we would regularly develop a strategy, completely fail to implement it, conclude that it wasn't working, and then develop another strategy. We develop a strategy, and then the biggest challenge and the biggest success factor is implementation. And implementation requires that we do things systematically, and we persevere. When we set out to do something, we implement it and we persevere with it. We don't allow it to fall off the radar. And at some point in the future, someone says, "Oh, well, what became of that initiative?" No, we don't really know. We're setting, there's a wonderful term, if any of you are divers, you will know that when you do your diver training, there's a wonderful term which is plan your dive and dive your plan. And we have planned the dive, and now we're going to be diving the plan, and we're going to be focusing very, very strongly on implementation.
And how important, is collaboration in terms of the implementation? I know you talked a lot about engagement and the role of every employee in this process.
I hope it goes without saying that that if there isn't the collaboration, this is going to be swimming through treacle, and it's not going to deliver on what it can deliver. And our approach is we want the collaboration, but we want the collaboration to be driven by a desire amongst employees of Massy to make this part of how Massy operates. And if that's happening, then we go places, then we climb mountains. And we see a lot of this, and I'm going to be very ageist, if you'll allow me to be that. I fall into the category, so I think I'm punching up and not down. What we find in organizations where we implement management systems is we generally find across the board an enormous energy and enormous passion amongst younger folk to make sustainability part of their organization. And we're looking forward to that, and we're looking forward to the ideas that come out of that. By the same token, what I said earlier about implementation is that we will be diving the plan. So we are going to be doing what we set out to do, and we really would welcome a buy-in to that process and support for that process.
Thank you. There's a question from Shivani. Is the environmental and social management system aligned to ISO 1401 EMS and ISO 26000 social responsibility guidance?
I don't know if any of you saw Jack Smith's testimony in front of Congress. That was the simplest testimony that I've ever seen, and he just gave yes/no answers. And the answer to that is yes. The system is based on ISO 14001, the standard, the Environmental Management System standard. And right now, Massy is not seeking certification, but that is something that ultimately they will work towards. And the system that's being developed will facilitate that with some additional refinements and some additional procedures.
Great. And so that kind of leads into another question that just came in directly to me. How do the international standards like the IFC performance standards and equator principles influence financing and investment decisions today?
Well, it's you can't have one without the other. And if we
want me
look
to take that one, Sean?
yes, run with it, Niels. Go for it.
The performance standards are basically adopted by all the banks under the equator principles, and in the real world, they stand for between 50 and 80% of all big project financing in the world every year, which means that between 50 and 80% of all big project financing in the world actually has to adhere to exactly those performance standards. So it's a very strong force, much more than we thought when we developed them, because I was part of the team. But they have really been adopted around the world so far that even the Bank of China has adopted them. And therefore, it's natural that the Inter-American Development Bank, who's behind the big loan for you, has also adopted them. And therefore, they are part of the background for the system that is being set up now.
Great. So another question just popped in. Niels, maybe you can respond to this one. Can you just give a little context for those who don't know what the equator principles are?
It's basically a set of standards that were developed in the International Finance Corporation quite long ago now, because the banks realized that if they were investing in projects that did the wrong thing, whether it was socially or environmentally, then they would typically end up losing money. And if there's something banks hate, then it's to lose money. And they basically ended up dividing the different areas of risk into 8 different things. And one is the performance standard number 1, which is really the most important one, is actually the one that say that you have to have an environmental management system. Because what it does, whether you call it Massy's environmental management system, whether you call it ISO 14000 or whatever, it's basically just a system for you to collect the information on what you're doing so that you actually know what you're doing. You're not sitting there ignorant. You know what your risks are. You know where your biggest potential risk in the future are, and then you can act on them. To have a management system actually doesn't mean that you're automatically good. It just means that you know what you're doing, but it's very few people in this world want to know what they're doing and know that they're doing it bad. So therefore, people who have a management system typically are taking wiser decisions than those who do not have. So that's the first performance standard. Then there's a performance standard on labor rights, for example. How do you treat your labor force? And it's very much relying on the ILO core labor standards. So the freedom for association, the freedom to negotiate, the protection against abuse, and so on. Then there's a standard for environmental pollution. There are standards for how you protect critical habitat, which was, for example, what Sean started out with in the presentation, that you have actually some endangered species in Trinidad. There are how you protect cultural assets. There's how you have to deal with it. If you're a company and you need new land that you can't just bulldoze people away, you can negotiate with them and agree on a price for how you buy the land. And so all these different risk sectors that are typical for industrial operations are all covered within these standards. They are not standards that are describing the highest standard in the world. They're actually standards where it's tried to balance what can realistically be achieved anywhere in the world. And they are meant to be used to kick in if a local government have not done any regulation in an area, and therefore it's left for sailing in the wind, as we would say. It's meant to set a reasonable standard, not a super high standard, but definitely also not a low standard, but a fair standard as a starting point. That is basically what's in the performance standard. A good set of basic things to acknowledge and deal with.
So
Great.
Katrina, if I may, I just want to add, and I'll keep it brief. The first thing is just to remind everyone that in the introduction to Niels, it was stated that he was with the IFC for 27 years, I think, and he played quite a critical role in writing up those standards. The second thing that I want to say is that the standards that Niels were defining, the equator principles are a set of principles that get commercial banks to sign up to implementing those IFC standards. So the IFC, the way to think about the IFC is it's the private sector component of the World Bank. So really one of the core financing sources globally. Just coming back to what Niels was saying, if we look at the performance standards in general terms, we find that in almost all cases, they are beyond what is required by local authorities. They take you further than what is required by local authorities. And then the final thing that I wanted to say is that we will also be beating a drum where we talk about good practice. We don't talk about best practice. And that was what Niels was saying. We don't find some obscure activity that is done somewhere in Norway and make everyone comply with that standard. But we adopt what is referred to as good practice, globally recognized as good practice. And that reflects on what Niels was saying about the standards that we seek to attain.
Thank you so much. So we have Karan asking, implementing those programs require financial support and change in culture, as you outlined, right, Sean? So what would be required of an organization in terms of percentage of revenue that should be invested to at least start with the adoption of some of these standards?
So can we also specify the percentage of revenue that comes to Niels and I in this process? It's also a great question because it does reflect on the fact that in the early stages, what we really try to do is recognize and consolidate on what you are doing already. We don't from the get-go come in and look at massive expenditure. We capitalize on what you do and do well, and we build that into the management system. But we look very critically at key sources of risk. And as a function of that risk, we would drive for the implementation of some kind of risk management process. And if that risk is severe enough, that risk management requirement could be a significant cost. We don't anticipate it for an organization like Massy because typically we would be looking at a large industrial manufacturer, for example, where they might have emissions of a particular pollutant type that threatens the health of communities living around there. And that would cost a lot of money to implement scrubbers to remove those gases. For an organization like Massy, we don't anticipate that it's going to be a significant amount relative to turnover, but it doesn't come for free. It doesn't come for free, and ultimately it is risk-driven, as I say.
So
I think
given
I would say that I think I would say that this is actually a really good question because it's nearly impossible to answer. To have an environmental and social management system itself doesn't cost much, to be honest, but having it and knowing what you're doing might lead to you needing to take some decisions about how you handle things in the future that might cost you. And that's where the real cost can come in. But it comes in because you take a decision to use some money for avoiding another risk.
Right. So I don't know, for some reason my camera stopped working, so that's okay. So just following up on that, given the Caribbean context, what ESG risks and opportunities do you see as most critical for businesses in our region?
So we can get we have to look at that risk in two ways. We have to look at the risk to the business as a function of your activities and the environmental risks that they pose. And then we have to look at risk in terms of risks that are presented by the environment. And I think what happened in Jamaica is a very good illustration of some of the risks that are presented by the environment. Serious potential disruption to business activities that could have a serious impact on your profitability. Climate change is right behind that. Sea level rise, unlikely to be something in the very near future, but something that needs to be thought about in future. But we need to evacuate. We need
Sorry,
to
everyone, we're having a little bit of an issue, an emergency here, so we are gonna have to log off, but thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.